When horrific school shootings and other mass shootings happen, the media swarms onto the scene. And in newsrooms, they rush to get all the details they can. This leads to problems and controversies. There's one you've probably heard about, the propensity to give the shooter so much attention. Law enforcement groups, researchers, private organizations, and families of people killed in these attacks have been calling for that to change. But there is a whole other issue you probably have not heard about. Photos and videos of children who are suffering trauma and horror after one of these shootings. The law does not offer the kinds of protections that a lot of people think. Now there is a new call for the media to change its practices on this. Today you'll hear from someone who survived a school shooting decades ago and explains how the media reawakens trauma with repeated uses of certain images from when people were children. You'll also hear from a dad who says what it takes to get the media to change its practices. Also today, a deep political shift among three of the nation's biggest newspapers. They are moving in opposite directions, signaling a change at the heart of our political media. One of them is owned by Rupert Murdoch. The other two have a long history of being staunchly liberal. But guess which one is being tougher against Trump? Plus, in preparing for this episode, I discovered something about one of these papers, something I've never seen before. All that and more coming up today on They Stand Corrected. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Josh Lives, and this is my podcast, They Stand Corrected, which fact-checks the news and helps you understand the systemic problems that are leading to so much media failure. You can learn about me and my background at my website, joshlives.com. You'll see that I spent 10 years on NPR and 10 years at CNN. Anyway, lots of information for you there. I'm starting off today with the scourge in American society, mass shootings and school shootings. One took place the other day at a Catholic school in Minnesota. There is some confusion about how often school shootings take place. That is because some of the lists you see include shootings among gangs, for example, in parking lots at night or on a weekend when schools are closed, or other acts involving gunfire, sometimes in the parking lot of an abandoned school building. So there have been questions about the overall numbers, but this is still horrifically common in America. Education Week says there have been 8 school shootings with injuries or deaths already this year. I'll include an interactive map for you in my newsletter. When mass shootings and school shootings happen, the media often faces criticism for showing images of the shooter and talking about the shooter's manifesto, basically giving the shooter the kind of attention that this person, usually a man, usually a young man, wanted. As I record this, the information from Minneapolis at the Annunciation Catholic Church indicates that that's the case here as well. This problem is something that the media has been increasingly aware of. In fact, sometimes the media itself reports on this. Here's a good local report from a station in Louisville, Kentucky, known as WAVE, W-A-V-E, after a shooting at Old National Bank last year killed 5 people and wounded 8 others.
The investigative file included several images of the shooter, pictures and posts he'd taken, and handwritten notes explaining his motive for killing his coworkers. One of those notes was his desire to have his story told. A desire for notoriety and fame is something mass shooting expert Dr. Adam Lankford has seen from researching several other tragedies.
People who are desperate for fame or attention are more likely to commit these crimes.
The fame can be appealing to copycats.
There have been a lot of studies around this. At this point, the evidence is clear and overwhelming that these folks want their names out there. One of the most impassioned arguments I've seen came from Tom Teves. His son, Alex, was killed while shielding his girlfriend from a shooter at a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. Tom gave a TEDx talk. Here's part of what he said.
The Orlando Pulse nightclub murderer called a local news station during his attack and then stopped to check Facebook to see if he'd gone viral. The Aurora Theater murderer told his psychiatrist that he recognized he couldn't make an impact on the world in science, but he could become famous by blowing people up. The Umpqua Community College murderer wrote on his blog about a previous mass murderer, saying, "I've noticed that people like him are all alone and unknown, but when they spill a little blood, the whole world knows who they are."
Yep. Full disclosure here, I covered the Aurora mass shooting. I had no say over what photos or names showed up on CNN, and I did have the chance to interview and share stories of survivors. I still remember them. They were impactful. I also interviewed therapists who travel to lots of mass shootings to help people. But anyway, this whole idea is something on which the media has had some improvement. These days, it seems to be more a matter of social media. But to be clear, there's still work to be done in the mainstream media. But there has been little to no discussion in the media about what is done with images of children, how they're taken, and how they're used. When there is a school shooting or a mass shooting anywhere with kids there, you see pictures and videos of minors in the news. How do those images come to exist? Turns out there is confusion around this. A lot of people think that the media has to have parental permission to use images of their children in any scenario. I looked for data around how many parents believe this. I haven't found any solid survey figures, but when I was researching this online, there were lots of quotes in which parents said, "I thought the media needed my permission." It doesn't legally when photos are taken from a public place. Because of this confusion, I'm going to focus on this issue for a second. So it might sound like I'm jumping to a different topic, but if you're new to this show, just know this is something I do sometimes. It helps people understand certain key issues along the way. All right. Do you remember a battle between some celebrities and the paparazzi in California? They wanted the paparazzi to stop chasing them around to get photos of their children. Here was a clip from ABC about that. It starts with sound of actress Jennifer Garner.
I don't want a gang of shouting, arguing, law-breaking photographers who camp out everywhere we are, all day, every day, to continue traumatizing my kids. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. Sorry.
It is completely legal to photograph celebrities' children, but Garner and fellow actress Halle Berry are championing a bill that would make a snapper who, quote, seriously alarms, annoys, torments, or terrorizes a child in the process, liable to fines and jail time.
We aren't just whiny celebrities that many times people think we are. We're moms here.
What the reporter said in there is accurate. That new law used language that refers to some of the tactics paparazzi use, and it established that willful conduct that seriously alarms, annoys, torments, or terrorizes a child would face stiffer penalties. And that law says it has to be conduct that would cause a reasonable child to suffer substantial emotional distress. I understand why it says that about reasonable. Judges and courts need to determine what's reasonable, but of course at certain ages, reasonable child can feel like an oxymoron. So, short version here, there is not a law against reporters taking photos of children in public, especially if they're doing it without even going up to the kid and bothering them. Now, when school shootings happen, the media descends on the site. And as long as these journalists are standing across the street or anywhere on public property, they get those videos and photos, which are often shown all over the world. It helps to stop and think, if this was your kid, you don't have to have children to do this, obviously. It's a mental exercise. But a child has just suffered a kind of trauma and horror that hopefully most people of any age will never experience. People who have gone through this say it's not something you can imagine fully. So these kids are in trauma, in horror, and then their images from these moments are used everywhere forever. Last year, a group called the Rockefeller Institute came out with a study. They interviewed 167 survivors of mass shootings, including school shootings. About half of the survivors said their experiences with the media were exploitative. A woman who is part of this organization talked about this. Her name is Shannon Hill. She survived a shooting back in 1988, a school called Oakland Elementary in South Carolina. That makes her an especially strong voice on this because she can address what keeps happening for the rest of your life. Here is part of what she said in a video that the organization put out.
There's a picture of one of the girls that were murdered at my school. She's in a body bag and she is being put in the back of an ambulance. And that picture was on the front page of our newspaper day one. And every time, whether it was another year mark or anything that brought the story back up, they were using that picture. And the family knew that was their daughter, that was their sister that was in that body bag. They don't need to see that.
This group published recommendations for media following any mass shooting and any school shooting. They said to obtain consent before filming or taking photos so that survivors understand how their statements or images will be used. Journalists should approach survivors without a camera or audio device and request permission before recording. They also should share the angle of the story and why they want to talk to the survivor up front. Special care should be used with juveniles, and parent or guardian consent should be obtained before interviewing. That is not too much to ask when it's a child. And none of this means hiding the reality. In episode 66 of this show, I shared sound from Mamie Till, a pivotal civil rights figure. She chose to let the world see the mangled body of her son, Emmett Till, who was lynched. And in that episode, I interviewed these three women who are doing an incredible job of sifting through so much horrific material from the October 7th massacres by Palestinian terrorists who invaded Israel and slaughtered more than 1,000 people, including many children and babies. Helping people see the horror can be a very strong, very powerful move to wake people up to reality. And in this era, it can be especially important since there are so many fake images being put out by propagandists. But when it comes to images of kids, it should be the choice of parents. When entire families were killed, as you heard in that previous episode, it becomes more complicated and you have to figure out who makes that call. Anyway, the media in general has not tackled this issue. So you deserve to know that when you're looking at media from the aftermath of school shootings, on your phone, computer, TV, newspapers, wherever, those images of kids may have been taken and shared with you without anyone having a say on their behalf. One more note about this. When Tom Teves gave that TEDx talk, he said something about what it takes to get the media to change.
Stop watching, stop listening, stop clicking, stop liking, and stop sharing. Write to the producers, editors, station managers, and CEOs of these news organizations. Take note of the advertisers who support those segments and write to their CEOs.
While he was talking about images of shooters, that same message applies to all the changes the media needs to make. That's why in my newsletter, I have email addresses and instructions for how to contact the biggest national news agencies about anything and everything they're doing wrong. I'll include a direct link to that in the show notes, so you'll see it in whatever app you're using or at my website. Coming up, the conservative editorial board of one of the nation's leading newspapers is standing up to Trump in a way that certain liberal ones are not. This is a story of a big shift taking place in American political media.
Think of the children, silent and brave, burying hope no one could save. They dream in corners dark and cold, too young to carry grief so old. Think of the
There is a 3-step dance the media uses to spread lies. In the newsletter, I break down what those 3 steps are so you can recognize what's happening every time you see it. It's a performance that swings public opinion and radicalizes people. That is just one of the many things you'll learn in the newsletter. It's designed to complement this show, giving you facts, sources, videos, photos, and more. Unlike the media, I don't expect you to take my word for anything. The newsletter is also where people send in their ideas and requests for topics to cover on this show. And there's another feature. Sometimes you probably hear someone say something that you know is false because you heard about it here, and you want to find where that was so you can send them a link. Well, here's how it works. When you go to the main page of the newsletter, you can type in any topic or the name of a news agency, just about anything, and it will show you where I have addressed that topic. It will bring you to the facts, which you can then share. I also have email addresses for major news sites and instructions for you to send messages to the leaders so you can let them know what they're doing wrong. The newsletter is free, but this show relies on your support, and the best way to support the show is to become a paid subscriber to the newsletter. When you do that, I reward you with exclusive content, I read messages from you on the show, and I help you save lots of money by accessing major news sites for free legally. To find the newsletter, check out the show notes or my website, joshlevs.com. You'll see a direct link. The newsletter is on a platform called Substack. If you're already on Substack, just look me up by name or by the title. They stand corrected. Thank you. Trump has been publicly railing against the Wall Street Journal, one of the newspapers in Rupert Murdoch's empire. He has been slamming the paper, while their editorial board has called out some of his policies and actions. I did a previous episode about what editorial boards are. It's generally a handful of people in the opinion and editorial side of the newsroom who take a position on behalf of the paper. The Wall Street Journal is not backing down. This was striking. Just the other day, the journal's editorial board put out a new column.
It is increasingly clear that vengeance is a large part, maybe the largest part, of how he will define success in his second term.
They were writing about the raid on the house of John Bolton, Trump's first-term national security advisor. Do you remember how Trump says he always hires the best people, but then he fires them and says they were so awful? In his world, no one ever seems to point out that would mean he's incapable of hiring the best people in the first place. Bolton is among the people who worked with Trump in his first term and then publicly criticized him. Bolton wrote a book. The Journal pointed out that the book went through an extensive pre-publication scrub at the White House for classified material at the time, but Trump wanted to quash the book and still tried to claim that it had classified material in it. He also pulled Bolton's security protection, even though the Justice Department under Biden charged an Iranian national who allegedly planned to kill Bolton. Trump did the same for former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and his former top advisor on Iran, Brian Hook. Here is what the Journal said about all that.
This is the kind of gratuitous viciousness that has increasingly defined Mr. Trump's return to office. It's unlikely that Mr. Bolton broke any laws on national secrets, and he certainly didn't share any with us over our long association with him. But perhaps Mr. Trump intends for the process itself to be the punishment, even if there is ultimately no criminal charge. Mr. Bolton has to pay for legal counsel, and his family has to endure the anxiety of being under federal government siege.
This is big. They're not just going after his policies, they are characterizing his presidency. They're showing a backbone in standing up to Trump's worst impulses. The Journal was stronger in its criticism than the Washington Post. When it comes to U.S. politics, the Post's editorial board used to be unafraid in standing up to Trump. But then last year, owner Jeff Bezos announced that he was taking the paper in a new direction, that he seemed to be afraid of what Trump could do to his businesses. Anyway, the Washington Post editorial board did write about this Bolton raid. And they did call it a revenge campaign. But there are also lines in what they wrote that show they are not willing to go as far as the Wall Street Journal.
The government needed to show probable cause to get a judge to sign the search warrant, so it's possible there was a rock-solid predicate for the search. But Trump's promises of retribution and revenge make the government's motives suspect.
Technically, that is true. And in reporting in the news pages, it's important to note how this works. News agencies pointed this out when Trump's home was raided. He absolutely had classified material that he was keeping at Mar-a-Lago. But context is everything. When the name of a judge and the arguments are confidential, are sealed, as this was, a president can only rely on people's trust. And Trump has lied about so many things that he doesn't have a reasonable reservoir of trust. He also has a long history of judge shopping and not caring what the laws are or what court decisions are. Those are all his actions. So there isn't a logical reason to assume a rock-solid predicate here, but sure, it could exist. If you read these, you will probably see that the Wall Street Journal is being tougher on Trump than the Washington Post is. But that is not the biggest difference. There's another newspaper in the mix here, also one of the biggest in America. It's also owned by a billionaire, Patrick Soon-Shiong. I'm talking about the LA Times. I reported last year that in an interview, he said he was on the editorial board of the paper. But at that same time, the paper did not list him as a member of the editorial board. So it really was not clear to me whether he even knew what an editorial board was, even though he was talking about it and owned the paper. Zoom ahead to now. What did the LA Times editorial board say about the Bolton raid? Nothing. It gets worse. When Trump sent troops into Los Angeles, what did the LA Times editorial board say then? Nothing. This is new and wild. According to their website, they stopped doing editorials in March. I went looking to see who is in the editorial board there now, and I saw something I've never seen before. In October, when I covered this previously, the LA Times editorial board webpage listed 6 members, and Patrick Soon-Shiong was not one of them. Now, the website lists a total of 2 people. One of them is him, and the other is Terry Tang, the newspaper's executive editor. That's it. It turns out there has been a mass exodus. The people who were part of the editorial board previously left. Something similar happened at the Washington Post. In both cases, when their billionaire owners pulled the editorial board's endorsements of Kamala Harris at the last minute last year, people who work for those papers felt that it was the billionaires intruding for political reasons into the opinion side of the newsroom. I explained back then, if you want to halt endorsements altogether, there's a way to do it. They could have announced it further in advance, or they could have waited until after the election and said, we won't do this anymore. But in both cases, these guys did it amid threats from Trump with no warning and in a way that certainly sent a signal of fear. Now, here's why all this matters. Editorial boards are not and should not be seen as these all-powerful, mysterious groups. What they are, in general, are a group of people at the opinion side of a paper who look at the balance of evidence and weigh in on where they stand on something. And they can be right or they can be wildly wrong. They are supposed to operate with knowledge of the news, and they're supposed to have more authority and more backing than individual contributors. So the LA Times did have an op-ed from one guy, Jonah Goldberg, speaking out against the Bolton raid. But when it comes to individual contributors, it's easy for these papers to say, well, that's just their opinion, has nothing to do with us. Of course, it's not that simple. These papers show their biases in terms of what op-eds they allow to be published and which ones they don't. So, what does all this tell us? When it comes to Trump, the Washington Post is pulling some punches. The LA Times seems to have dropped out of the fight altogether as a paper itself. But the Wall Street Journal, with its conservative editorial board, is punching harder than ever. This is new and different in our political scene. And that is not the only Murdoch-owned paper that has shown a willingness to stand up to Trump. The New York Post is part of that same corporate family after Trump called Ukraine a dictatorship, which is crazy. It's a democracy, and that threatens Russia. The New York Post ran a cover saying this is a dictator and showing Putin. They are showing a willingness to fight for democracy in ways that big mainstream media, which lean left, are not. The failures of big mainstream media on the left are opening up more opportunities for right-leaning media. The New York Post does a great job of calling out the biggest anti-democratic movement on the left, the hysterical demonization of Israel and support for Islamist terrorism that the mainstream media engages in every day, radicalizing people through lies. The Wall Street Journal has chosen some great op-eds lately from contributors, correcting mainstream media about that stuff too. And these papers are calling out dangerous anti-democratic moves by this administration. Of course, the solution to all this is not any political slant. It's a transformational take on news, a system of putting truth first always. And all of that comes together in the recent horrific school shooting. Politics, radicalization, the media acting like a swarm of bees that descends on an area, all of it. That is coming up. As a rule, I don't do social media battles, and I encourage other people not to as well. They're generally just a waste of time. But social media can be a great tool to get people truth. In fact, social media is an important tool to fight back in the mimetic warfare and influencing brand connectomes, two things you've heard about on this show. You can find me on social media. On most of the platforms, I have my name. And since I am no expert at creating pretty graphics, I am happy to say that a listener to this show is now helping me with the content I'm sharing on Instagram. He is at Gabe Draws, Gabe Draws. He is awesome. Thank you, Gabe. So if you are on social media platforms, find me at Josh Lebs. You will see that sometimes somebody posts a lie and I reply and I say, that's factually untrue. Here are some facts. But that's not a battle because I don't go back and look at whether they even replied to that. So not wasting my time on that. Focusing on putting this together for you. But I see your shares, your likes, the way you amplify that content, and it helps drive the audience for this show. So let's hook up there on the social media platforms at Josh Lebs, JoshLevs. Everything I've been talking about today comes together in a way in coverage of this recent horrific school shooting. In the wake of it, lots of political narratives suddenly arose, and they were predictable. On the left, there was the usual talk about access to assault weapons, which is part of the problem in America. And I will note that there are some disputes over what counts as an assault weapon. Either way, deranged people can get weapons, and people who have weapons can become deranged, and little to nothing is being done about it. While the American political left has been showing much more leadership on this, the left has increasingly made space for people who claim that the terrorist slaughter of children is okay under the warped concept of all means necessary. Democrats, especially progressives, have increasingly been standing with and posing for pictures with people who literally hand out actual Hamas propaganda, people who chant terrorist slogans, people who say any means necessary. That part of the political spectrum in America cannot claim to be leading against gun violence, obviously. Meanwhile, on the right, some people pointed to what seems to be the trans identity of this shooter in Minneapolis, insisting that accepting trans people leads to incidents like this. There is no reason to believe that any trans person is automatically more dangerous than any other person. It does not work that way. All the examples I just gave you come from false understandings of facts, of history, of science, and of the news. People don't have trustworthy sources of news anymore, and that helps radicalize people in different directions. I mentioned earlier that the string of violence is seen as an epidemic. A lot of scientists have come to see it that way. So let's think about medicine. In a hospital setting, a bunch of medical professionals can look at, let's say, x-rays and use their joint knowledge together to make decisions about the best course of action for a patient. If we in America were looking at the same stuff and brought together in a place in which we are expected to be rational, engage our rational minds, focus on facts, we could do a better job working toward solutions. As long as big media keep failing in the basics of their job, people will keep turning elsewhere. Partisan media have glommed onto that opportunity. What I'm doing here is trying something else, creating a place in which we put facts first together always. When you do anything to help grow this show, when you rate and review it on the platforms, when you tell people about it, when you send a note to a friend and say, I think this episode will matter for you, anything, you are helping grow this into something that can make a difference. I say that not as a pie in the sky hope, but as someone who has all this experience in big mainstream media, who has reason to believe that this can help. As always, I would love to hear from you. You know, there are 2 ways to reach me. The best is through the newsletter, and the second is through a form at my website at joshlevs.com. Oh, I thought I was going to talk about Russia this week. Due to the news, I did not, but I think I will have that for you next week. So much to correct in the media. As always, thank you for listening. I will see you next week.